you franchised in 2012. And if I have the stats down right here, you've got 22 franchises open. You've got your one company-owned location in Texas, in 5 states, right? Texas, Florida, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Arkansas, if I remember correctly. If you would, share with me sort of the franchise journey, because so much of our audience are actually their fellow emerging founders and folks interested in maybe getting involved in a franchise. And so I'd love to really, if I can get kind of a peek into the beginning. What made mom decide, hey, we're going to franchise this concept? And obviously you were there at the time. So this must have been this was a huge decision, because you had been around for quite a long time before you franchised the company.
So we had licensed a few centers here and there, and we had a bit of a brand name in the Dallas area. But some of the licensees were going a little bit of a different direction, and we wanted the name Gideon Math and Reading to mean something. So we decided, well, we better go on and start franchising. We actually really did not want to franchise. This was more of a necessity to protect the brand name. Than a strong desire to go that route, because it's a lot of work, when you get started. And so we wanted to make sure that when we were doing it, that we were going to do it right. But that was really what it was. It was just time to make sure the brand name was protected. And so that was the impetus.
Sure. Franchising is not for everybody, and we know that, right?
No.
So I'm curious, let's protect the innocent here for a moment. And I know that your mom was actually a franchisee of another brand before you guys started this company. What do you think was the hesitation to franchise and to go that licensing route? Because I think it's great for our audience. Again, fellow founders are hearing this. Maybe they're thinking of even franchising their company. To hear from a fellow CEO on what kind of the mind of what it was like, I think is real important.
We wanted to have a really simple business model when we first started. We were like a publisher of our booklets, the student booklets. So people purchased what they needed, and we didn't have to go into all the ways to tell people how to run the business. She was part of a system that sometimes, every system probably, I don't even want to say just this one, had some disgruntled people. And so she heard that disgruntlement, disgruntled comments. And we wanted to avoid some of that, of feeling like what you're paying in royalty is not what you're getting back and all that kind of stuff. We really didn't want to go that route. And so we wanted to just be publishers, just stick to a very simple model. But in order to be a good franchisor, we realized, once we switched to franchising, we realized, we're going to have to change things a little bit. But that was the original idea, was just to have a low-key business model that didn't require a lot of control over other people.
But as you came to find out, franchising was the better model for you over licensing. Because ultimately, you really did need to be able to instill those controls to protect the brand, right?
Absolutely. But we had some licensees, honestly, going a little rogue.
Sure.
And they frankly had the license to do that,
No pun intended.
So we needed, what Gideon Math and Reading meant was going to change center to center if we didn't go franchising. And so we needed to lock that down. We hadn't really thought of, protecting the brand when we first started. We were just kind of there to educate kids. You want to do it too, here you go. We were really laid back about it. But we just got a lot more intentional with what we were doing by 2012.
I had the same passing thought, though, about licensing originally. I started running an adult men's softball league in Long Island. And I thought, I'm going to expand my sports programs around the country. And I thought it might be beneficial for people to run their own company under their own local name, because I thought maybe having that local name would have a greater impact. And then as I started looking into things further and becoming really a student of franchising, like in the late 90s, I came to find that there was far greater disadvantages of giving just that licensing. And I was giving up way too much. And maybe part of it was, truthfully, was fear of going into franchising, because it sounded at the time to me big and scary in the late 90s.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it is hard.
It is. It's not easy, of course, because suddenly when you're a franchisor, I think you start thinking about your franchisees as, I'm responsible for these people. Which is different than just licensing out. You're like, I'm licensing this out, go out and do it. But we give up a lot as a franchisor, or I should say as a licensor. We're giving up a ton. And for a second, we're giving up the protecting the brand. On top of that, we're really giving up the ability to have long-term growth and really wealth for everyone that's involved, not just the franchisees, but for the franchisor, but just licensing. It's almost like, I'm not just a proponent for franchising. I really think that it needs to fit your model. But if you think you're going to license because it's the cheaper, faster way of doing it, you're probably doing it it's the wrong decision. It's the wrong answer if that's your question.
It's the easy way out. That's how we saw it too. It's like, oh, let's just do this. This is the easy way. We don't have to go through get a franchise agreement and an FDD and all of that.
Right.
It felt easy, but you quickly get different problems you didn't anticipate too.
Right. What do we think? We're going to license and suddenly we're going to avoid all the problems? No.
Right.
You still have people. There are still people to help. So whether you want to call them a licensee or a franchisee, you are going to need to help them.
Yeah.
And you're giving up a lot. So I'm so curious, what was life like then when you first became a franchisor?
We didn't change that much. We really just created all of the documents and created some, requirements of how it runs. I did not even add a royalty when we first started. We just sold the booklets. We were really diehards on that model. Yeah. And, but in the end, I couldn't be the franchisor I needed to be, without the royalties. So we did end up adding it later. But it was, so we really kind of we were like a laid back franchise for quite a while. But we grew kind of slowly too. And I think because we didn't develop out what we needed to in those first few years, because we simply didn't have the income streams.
Sure. There's no apologies for charging a royalty. We as franchisors charge a royalty so that we can provide you with the necessary training and ongoing support. If I can't afford to provide you the support, you're going to be miserable as a franchisee in exchange for saying, I'm going to, relieve royalties. Nobody wins. I love that your mom was a franchisee. Too many of us we come in as we run a company on location and then we franchise, and we only know life as a franchisor, where, let's face it, mom, whether she was a disgruntled franchisee or not, ex-franchisee, she saw other people that were disgruntled. And sometimes it's better to know what to avoid than to know what you want, right? And so she had this great foundation.
Yeah. I mean, that was why we didn't do a royalty for a long time, was her experience and people being unhappy about it. And so she wanted to have this different business model. We were very idealistic. And it, for a little while it worked. It just didn't work to take us to the level of growth. We were going to be stagnant if we didn't add the royalty, because I couldn't add staff and support, all the support that franchises need. It takes money.
Yeah. A great point though to make is that for people that are listening to this, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, it wasn't that those franchisees were disgruntled because they were just paying a royalty. They were mad because they were paying a royalty and not getting the right support and promotion of the brand. That was they weren't getting value for what they expected. Right. And maybe even what they were told, because there was definitely a misalignment of expectation.
Right. Exactly. And to be fair, I feel like that can be a common complaint within franchising amongst franchisees. But, when we're only the franchisee perspective, we sympathize with it quite a bit.
Sure.
Now we're on the other side. I honestly understand some of the restrictions of my mom's former brand, but we still are unique. We're going to be different than them. We're going to learn lessons from her experience.
Right.
But I do understand a little bit more, because, things are required.
Absolutely. How did you guys find your first dozen franchisees? Where did they come from?
They were all parents, typically, of Gideon students. So their students come in, their child comes in, has a great experience. They really like the system. They see that it's a part-time model. We typically open about 4 p.m. and close about 7 or 8. You have some things during the day, but, there's a lot of flexibility with your mornings. And so it just looked like a great business for people to start. So that's really most of my beginning franchisees were either parents or they knew someone who was a parent.
Yeah, that is so typical. People that start out new in franchising think, okay, I've got to spend all this money in PR and the web portals and do trade shows, and those are going to be my first people. Those folks are not going to want to be your first franchisee typically. It's somebody who's had involvement with your business.
We really didn't spend any money on advertising for a long time.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fumey, or Emerging Franchise Group, LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.